guess it is by now, everybody. Thank you all so much for coming. My name's Brett King. I'm the museum director. And today we have the pleasure of having Will Bolton, Secret Service agent, going to give you kind of a talk in the history of his life and experiences. I've got a quick bio here I'll read on him. So give you a little background and help formulate your questions for him that I'm sure you'll have later. Will Bolton's a retired federal criminal investigator, senior special agent. He began his career in the United States Secret Service and served in Customs Office of Internal Affairs as well as the Department of Homeland Security, Office of Inspector General. He served in various capacities as protective details of political figures, terrorism task force, money laundering investigations. My son's here, so be good. Misconduct, integrity investigations, also for my son. And national security matters. He began his career as a deputy sheriff in DeSoto County, Mississippi, and is also a veteran of the armed forces. He's got a master's degree in national security studies and a Middle East emphasis, and he'll be speaking about 31 years of government service and service to his country. So thank you very much, Will. We appreciate you coming. Everybody, thank you.
I appreciate the invite. I do. My wife can tell you I'm not very good at tooting my own horn, so if she waves at me or winks or jumps up and down, it means I forgot to tell y'all something. So she's supposed to keep me on track. But yeah, so I'm Will Bolton. I joined the military right out of high school, went in the Navy, and so a culmination of 2 years ago I retired. When you're like a criminal investigator with the federal government, you can retire at age 50 or at 25 years. I'm 51. I hit my 25 years at 49, and I decided I was ready to go. So we have our daughter Lily right there is 9, and we have a 7-year-old boy. We also have an older set, and so I just one day thought, you know what, I just want to be around a little bit more, because you do, as Brett can tell you, when you're serving, when the government is they'll eat their young traveling and whatnot. It's the mission first all the time. And so our last stint, I was in headquarters with the IG's office, and even that, we lived in Virginia, but traveling, my commute from our house to headquarters was a 2-hour train ride and a 10-block walk. So that was one way every day. And so, yeah, it's just, we have kids too that have settled in Tennessee, and if you ask me what we're doing here in Athens, one word is grandbabies. When we were looking to retire, my wife said no more than 30 minutes from the grandbabies. So our kids grew up in South Florida because we were in Miami a while, and her parents are in Cookeville, and so when our kids got to a certain age, they moved to Cookeville, 2 of them, and then they met their husbands, moved to Cleveland, and started having babies. So that's kind of how we're here. So, but anyway, as Brett was saying, I joined the Navy right out of high school, and then we were out in Virginia Beach. I got assigned to ComSublant, which is an admiral's staff. When I was in the military, and probably when you went in, it wasn't as nice as it is now. They tell you more what you're going to do. So leaving tech school, you're going to go here. But I don't want to go here. You have a Marine's hat. I'm guessing you're retired. Are you a retired Marine?
No, just 4 years.
You know, right? So you know,
Yeah.
I don't want to go to an admiral staff. Yeah, okay, you're going to an admiral staff. So one of those things. But we enjoyed it. We lived out in Virginia Beach, and we had our first daughter back then. Lee and I have been married 33 years this year. We dated in high school and got married, and so we were out there. We got out and went back to Mississippi, and then I started missing the military, so I went into the Air National Guard in Memphis, the 164th Air Wing there, and they call it security forces now, but it's security police. So just military police. And so I was interested in law enforcement, and the chief in my unit, he and I were talking one day, and he reserved out in a little town called Millington. Is anybody familiar with Millington, Tennessee? Yeah, there you go. Yeah, Millington is the personnel center now, but at one time it was a big air station. So anyway, we started reserving out there in the little town as patrolmen. He had been doing it and brought me on, and I liked it, and so I went on to the sheriff's office and went back to, I was at what's called an AGR, which is like an active guard. So I was active Navy, got out, was active guard. Then I went back kind of the 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks a year thing to be a deputy sheriff. So in that, Al Gore, and I apologize because in my PowerPoint, I was telling Lee last night, I have a picture of me shaking hands with Al Gore, I just couldn't find it. My daughter can tell you I looked in 1,000 boxes last night trying to find stuff, and I just could not find it. So I promise it's there. But so anyway, Al Gore would fly into the base, and we would secure his planes and kind of assist the Secret Service in their visits. And so one day I said to my chief, I was like, "Oh, that looks like an interesting job." And he said, "Hey, now," he said, "you want to talk to him?" And so the next thing I know, I had these two agents in sunglasses coming up to me. "You interested in the job?" And I said, "Oh, yeah, it looks like an interesting job." And okay. Come down to the office next week. So I went to the Memphis office and interviewed with the SAC, which is the Special Agent in Charge. That's what that stands for. And they ask you every nitpicking piece of your life. As you can imagine, to get in a position where you're standing near protectees, not even just the current president, but heads of state, different things like that. They want to know every little nitpicking thing about everything about you. So went through that for a few hours, and then they ended up, I don't know, a week or so later said, "Okay, he wants you. Put an application in." And I said, "Well, hold on. I said, I've got one class. I'm majoring in psychology, and I got one class." And one of the agents said, "Dude, we want you. We don't give a crap what it's in. Just get the paper." So I talked to my advisor, and I had a bunch of military schools and whatever, and they said, "Yeah, if you'll take a liberal arts degree, you can do it." So I called the guy back, and I said, "It's liberal." He said, "We don't care. Just get the paper." I said, "Okay." So I took my degree in liberal arts and then filled out the application. And it takes about 2 years to get through the process between you do the initial, then you go back and you talk to a board, and then there's a polygraph. Who's taken a polygraph in here? Never?
I haven't. No.
Really?
You've taken one? They're a little bit nerve-wracking, right? Yeah, because a lot of it's and I can tell you that just from working cases too and having people take polygraphs. So a lot of it too is they mess with you when you're doing it. I think. I mean, they're like, "You seem like you're not being truthful about this." "No, I swear I'm telling you. I don't know." I mean, so one thing they were talking about was, you seem like you're not truthful when you're talking about honesty with your wife. And I said, "Look, if my wife's wearing a god-awful dress, I'm not dumb enough to tell her she's wearing a god-awful." So yes, I probably lied to her and stuff like that. And they were just like, "Oh, okay." So anyway, all that rolls around, and they kept saying, "We're 99% sure you'll be in Memphis. 99% sure you're going to stay in Memphis." "Oh, okay, great." I even told her, Memphis. They called and said, "Congratulations, you got the job. Hey, now, there's some seats right there." They said, "Congratulations, you got the job. Oh, that's wonderful. It's in Miami if you want." I was like, "Miami, Florida?" And they were like, Yep. So I said, "Hold on," and I talked to the boss and said, "What's your feelings on Miami?" And what did you say? "It'll be an adventure." So we moved down to Miami, and we were there 13, 14 years, something like that. It was a good experience, a lot of good times. We enjoyed it. It was good in the aspect of working cases. If you don't know how the Secret Service is laid out or structured, there we go. See how much younger I am back there? Goodness me. My kids last night, some of our grandbabies live with us, and they said, Pop, you were so young. And they go, "You're really old now." That was just I threw that in there. That was just I had the fortune or misfortune of having some newspaper people from the Commercial Appeal ride with me one night. So I was a deputy before Tunica had casinos, and so that was that was the story. With the casinos getting put up, there were a lot more traffic fatalities because people were drinking and whatever, and driving up 78, 61, and getting into a lot more wrecks. And so that was just the whole gist of that. So at the bottom of the article somewhere, you'll see they'll say Deputy Bolton didn't make a stop all night. Deputy Bolton was told not to make a stop with the newspaper people in the car. So if you see something, call somebody else. So and I don't know if it's changed. Mississippi back then was an at-will state, which means they can fire you at will. I mean, it's the sheriff can fire you at his pleasure if he didn't like the way you looked. If you're whatever, you're done. And so, yeah, an interesting time. But I grew up in that county. I was raised in Hernando, which is about 25 minutes south of Memphis, and that's all DeSoto County. And funny or not funny story. So I had a call one night about, it was a domestic and a potential drug user and whatever. So I pulled up and I saw a guy run by my car. Then I saw my sergeant run by, so I put the car in park and I started running over there, and I see the guy hit my sergeant and knock him off his feet. So I tackled the guy, and I'm cuffing him, and I grabbed him by the hair and turned his head, and he was somebody we went to church with. And he was high, fairly high on meth, screaming and whatever. And sadly, because we knew the family a long time, his mother never spoke to me again and she's passed away now a few years ago. But she was very angry about it. And that's what happens when you work somewhere like Athens, right? Guys who grew up here and get on the PD. It's a tricky thing. But one thing I've always done is I try to treat people with respect, right? My wife and I were listening to a sermon this morning. The guy was saying there's a difference in power and authority. There's a difference in the two. People give you the authority, and it's a lot of times based on the way you treat them. And so every now and again, I might have had to fight. I say fight. I say fight, I don't mean fight like that, but struggle with someone to arrest them, not that often, because I try to reason with people as much as I can. So yeah, it was a good time. I enjoyed it, but I had that kind of, man, I want to do something else. I want to do something more. And so I ended up, that's when I met the Secret Service guys and started talking to them. So it was a nice time. So this is just I grabbed some certificates just so you all could kind of get an idea what they look like. This is the Federal Criminal Investigator Training Program. It's in Brunswick, Georgia. Anybody know St. Simon's Island? Anybody familiar with that area? Mm-hmm. You know Brunswick then. You know where Fletzy's at? It's like a fenced-in compound out in the whatever. So it's right there. But you go through. I was there 14 weeks. They change up things, but you just kind of learn the basics of criminal investigation. You kind of learn interviewing, you learn interviewing, interrogation. You learn how to follow clues. You know how to put a case together. You know the all important report writing, because Uncle Sam likes his paperwork. I was going through. One thing I learned in the government is keep everything, because you never know when it'll come back. So last night I was looking at. This is how long I was on, but I was looking at paper time and attendance sheets that I had from 20 years ago. I told my wife, I was like, I think I can probably chunk these now, but yeah, you learn how to do all that kind of stuff. And basically, when you're done, every agency except for the Bureau, the FBI, the United States Postal Inspection Service, and the DEA go to FLETC. Everybody else goes, any inspector general, ATF, everybody goes. That's like your basic thing. I was there 14 weeks because you learn the Secret Service has more specific, and a lot of times you do a follow-on when you're agency. That's just a general thing. That's like boot camp or like General Police Academy. But when you funnel out to an agency, like you might, if you went to Social Security Inspector General, you got to learn that kind of those violations and that kind of law and that kind of thing. So the service at and I'd guess they've expanded it now years later, but when I got out, it was bank fraud, counterfeiting, protection, and then a lot of those you can kind of open up. Bank fraud opens a lot of doors, but then they have electronic crimes they were kind of just getting into back then. I was actually at FLETC on 9/11. I remember when they stopped class, had everybody come out and we watched the planes hitting the towers, and they just kind of let us know this is going to change, everything's going to change. So for those who don't know, the Secret Service was under Treasury. So this is my first badge, Treasury badge. That's where they started. The agency was actually, it was signed into law by Abraham Lincoln the day he was assassinated, but it wasn't signed into law to protect him. It was signed into law to protect the nation's currency, because post-Civil War, counterfeiting was rampant. And the service now still has, I shouldn't say now, but when I was there, you still worked counterfeiting, even though it wasn't a big, it wasn't as big in the U.S. as it had been. I mean, you might have had the drug cartels do printing presses in the jungle floor, or there's a thing called a super note. which the North Koreans perfected, and it's very good. You have to, that's another thing in the Secret Service portion, you learn how to look at money to make sure it's accurate, and it's got threads and different things. If you took a magnifying glass and put a dollar bill or 20 under it, an older 20 you'd see little fibers in it because that's what it was made out of. So just that little note in there too. I mean, you have the service. The service was created to protect the nation's currency supply. They were given protection kind of ad hoc because back up until the Bureau came on the scene and got the authority that they have, the service was the only federal agency. I take that back. They're the only federal investigative agency. The U.S. Marshals were around since the 1800s, but the service they did counterintelligence, they did any kind of criminal investigation, all that kind of stuff, up until the Bureau came on the scene. And then the service had to make a decision at some point about, do we want to be the protection or do we want to do whatever? And they picked the protection aspect, which is interesting. I mean, you can't, the protection's a tough job, right? It's tough to balance all that, and I'll get to a slide in a minute and I'll explain a little bit more, but it's the bread and butter of the agency. That's where the budget comes from. That's where the personnel come from. That's what it's primarily based on. And it's a thankless job. I mean, it is. I mean, I had fun. I definitely, and there's my special agent training course from the service. I had fun doing protection. It was a lot of fun, but it also can grind you down a little bit too. Like, I stood in a stairwell in Singapore for 14 hours with no bathroom, no food, no nothing before, because somebody messed up when they were allocating bodies, as happens, right? People make mistakes, and so that's just, the mission comes first. So these are my first creds that I had from the Treasury Department. You said they voided them all out there, but I just thought you all might enjoy that book, seeing that book cover. It's an old book I bought years ago. It's just, I can't remember what year it came out, but you talk about U.E. Bachman, Chief U.S. Secret Service, that's old. That's probably turn of the century era book there. So, but yeah, just an interesting agency. There's an interesting book called The Hidden History of an Enigmatic Agency, and it really is, because there's such a balance that you have to strike, especially in the protection aspect, the presidential details and whatnot, because if you make the guy mad who's signing the budgets, that's problematic. And sometimes it's interesting because you sometimes can't, you have to be careful in what you say and what you do. What the best thing to do might not be what they want to do, if that makes sense, because people have their own minds, right? And they're I want to go left, I want to go right. When I get to, if I forget to come back to this, I'll get down to a picture in a minute. It'll obviously be in China. Remind me if I don't bring it up to tell you about my experience in China on protection. So that was my first squad. There was the bank squad. They call it the financial institution fraud, but we just call it the bank fraud. And it opens the door for everything. I mean, mortgage fraud, check fraud, anything like that. The service still works, and there's a handful of them, I think, floating around. Treasury checks. We used to all hate getting, we called them T-checks. We hated getting T-check cases because they were usually very boring to mess with. But one thing I had in there, and again, it was, there we go. Having been a local and having the mindset I have about locals, I admire local police because every day of the week, as a local, you're getting more. You're getting the potential to be shot. You're getting fights. You're getting all that, a lot more than a federal agent will. Federal agents, I'm not saying it's not a dangerous job, like on warrants and on knock and talks, that kind of stuff. But a federal agent doesn't typically pull a car over, right? And so that's where kind of the danger is. So I have the utmost respect for federal agents. So one thing in bank fraud, or in the criminal side of the house, because the services, when you first get hired, they send you to a field office that you work criminal cases. You're on what's called well, back then it was called a rota, which is like a rotational schedule, and that's what I'm dating myself again, it was a pager. It was a pager in various stages. The last one I had I thought was very fancy. It was flip screen and all that, but they'll page you and tell you you're going to go do XYZ protection. But when you're in the field office, that's what you're doing. You're doing investigations, however you get into them. And so this case was interesting. So I had I was on duty and I had a phone call. Was it 2 in the morning? Midnight, 2 in the morning? I forget. She got woken up a lot. But so I got a call about 2 in the morning to go to a response with Broward County Sheriff's Office. And so it was at a hotel. So I went to the hotel and we had, there were a couple folks in the hotel. It was that guy and that guy. So they were in a hotel room and they just had some checks in there, a large amount of checks from a bank that didn't belong to them. You know, you could obviously tell. So in digging through the whole thing, some of the details of this are a little strange. But so they were all homosexual, and they had this guy and this guy were in a relationship. They were all illegal aliens from the Bahamas, except for this guy was Jamaican. So these two were in a relationship. So he basically would let the guy in on a Saturday morning at the bank he worked at, and they would go. Does anybody remember the old signature cards from a bank that you had your social, your date of birth? I did a search warrant, and they had 475 signature cards. They were together, and he would let them. So what they were using the money for was they were all transitioning, and so there's nothing like doing a search warrant, and you get like a 6'5" foot tall Jamaican guy, and there's a ball gown in the floor, and he's got breast implants, and they were using it. That was their whole push to transition. They would do that, and then they would also they'd buy houses, and they would live in the houses until they got repossessed, and then they'd be out, and then some poor older person from South Florida is a lot of snowbirds from Canada, and it would typically be Canadians that they would be doing the houses for. But that's one thing, they would live in them, they would tear them all to pieces, whatever, then they'd move on to the next one. And so at the end of this, we arrested all of them, and then plus 2 more that were, let me see here. These are some pictures here. So this is on a search warrant. These are just various checks I showed you all. But in the arrest of these two, we came across, whoops. Hey, your buttons they got me all confused. They're backwards. I don't know why we didn't put them on there, but the detective I worked with had this thing made up at the time. But that's postal inspectors, Broward sheriffs, and then us. But they had a couple of Cuban. I don't even know what they did for a living besides fraud, but another guy they did was a postal employee. And so that was something else he would do. He would get checks in his mail bundle and he'd hand them over. And then they were all together working this whole thing. That was the first time I ever had to pull my gun on somebody when I worked for the feds, because we were in an alley approaching him, and he was standing there, and we were like, "Hey, come here." And he got in his car, put it in drive, and punched it toward us. And so I happened to be standing, it was further back in that wall, but I happened to pull my gun and talk him out of it, and he finally stopped and laid down. But so to show you that, fraud is rampant, unfortunately. There's a saying, I forget who came up with it, but it's the very best men are men at best, and that's it. I mean, we're all wonky in different areas, but so we ended up arresting him too. That's when the postal inspectors came in. So, actually I misspoke earlier. Now that I remind myself about the postal inspectors, they're actually the oldest investigative. Can anybody guess who signed them into existence? Just a while, or who started the postal inspectors? Anybody?
Was it Lincoln?
Right.
Hamilton?
Who said that? Franklin. It was Ben Franklin. Yep. And they'll tell you that. They're very proud of that. Now every postal inspector I ever worked with was a really good guy. They're all very solid. And this is their thing, and they can get nexus into things if the mail's involved, they get a hook in. And so we had a couple of good guys working on that case. There we go. So what I meant to tell you, my wife was on me in the car. Remember to say this. So the 2 Cubans I was talking about, does anybody know what that is? So some Cubans have Santeria, which
Yeah.
is it's like a voodoo, Afro-Brazilian Catholicism. It's a mix of 100 different things. And so, doing that warrant, that was something we ran across in there, and I had never seen it before, so we took pictures of it. I thought it was very interesting. But like that, they offer drinks of alcohol to whoever they're worshiping and whatever. The funny story about that, when we took the two of them to Miami Department of Corrections, so we took them in there. So Miami Department of Corrections, as you can imagine, there's a lot of Cubans in Miami, and that's Miami is just it's mostly Cuban. It just is. I mean, it's just been since the Mario boat lift. It's just been that's what happened. And so she gets out, and her boyfriend starts speaking Spanish. Well, I didn't speak Spanish at the time, so I said, "Hey, be quiet. You sit there. You sit there." So she started saying something in Spanish. I don't know what it was. And so all these guards at Miami Department of Corrections, all these big buff guys, they started like backing up. And the next thing I knew, I was standing there alone, and I was like, "What was that?" And they said, "Oh, bro, she cursed you. She put a curse on you. We don't want anything to do with that. We don't even want. She put a curse on you." So luckily, it's never come to fruition, but I don't think it has anyway. But maybe it's the getting old part. I don't know. But she was not very happy where she was going. So, and that was just a write-up. I figured I'd throw in there. That reminds me. This kid right here, Brad Leopard, was an agent I worked with. And so he was from, I want to say it was Greenville, South Carolina. And so his parents were, I think his parents were in their 70s at that time. They had him a little later in life. And so he was just a little quiet country kid. And so I was out on protection. And so he ended up going to do a search warrant, or no, going to interview one of the suspects at the jail for me. And so, Brad was a big muscular guy, curly blonde hair, blue-eyed. So as he's leaving, one of the suspects who had a little bit of work done opened his shirt, pushed his enhanced breast against the glass, and was flirting with Brad. And the next thing I knew, I get a phone call from Brad. He's stuttering. He said, but Bolton, I don't. And I said, "Just breathe, man. Just breathe." But yeah, it was the poor kid. He was very shocked at that. He talked about that for months, and I was like, "I'm sorry, man. I'm sorry." Now you see what I've been going through. When they were talking about this at the U.S. Attorney's Office, they were like, "So this is like a weird counterculture." I said, "They're doing fraud, and this is what they're using it for." I don't know. That just shows you people. People typically, you don't know what they're doing fraud for. I mean, you don't know what the end game is. But so after I left banks, I went into counterfeit squad. I was in it for about a year, and I hated it. I'll be honest with you, I hated it. It was not, counterfeiting is not what it was. And so after many times of responding to teenagers printing out $20 bills on their home computers, I was kind of like, I was over counterfeiting. The thing is, you have to investigate it. I mean, you can't not investigate it. It is a federal crime, especially when they're trying to pass the notes. Even though it's a 15-year-old and it's a lot more tricky with all the other stuff. They typically don't get anything, to be honest with you. So I asked to, after a year, because you had to do at least a year, I asked to go over to a terrorism task force at the FBI in Miami. And my bosses were like, and then anybody that's worked in federal government can tell you all the agencies hate each other. I mean, I don't know if that's totally accurate, but it's law enforcement. Everybody's like, we're better. My bosses were all, "It's the Bureau, man. They suck. Why do you want to go over there?" I said, well, sir, they might say we suck. I don't know. But it was interesting work. We went over there, and I responded to many sightings of Osama bin Laden in various capacities. That people, I think I saw a brown guy with a beard in wherever. It's a homeless guy who's he's whatever. But there were some good cases. Some of them have a lot of meat to them. There you go. There's one right there. This was called the Miami 7 case, and we came across it. It was interesting. These guys were all some strange, like, don't even know how to describe it. They were kind of Islam, but kind of something else, and they all thought they were some kind of warriors, and they hated the U.S. was the main kick. And so they actually were seeking out Al-Qaeda in order to, they wanted to blow up the Sears Tower, the FBI building, different federal buildings. That was that was kind of their end game at the time. And as happens sometimes when people are discussing wanting to do criminal things, they happen to run across somebody who's willing to report them. And thank goodness that he did. And so we ended up working the case if I seem like I'm hesitating, it's because I'm trying to make sure I don't say anything I shouldn't say. So I'm kind of dancing around, right? I'm just trying to make sure I don't slip up and say something I shouldn't say. So that was the thing. What's that? Oh, not.
Oh, I can tell you were.
That's why I'm trying to catch myself. So they, but yeah, that was their whole thing, was they wanted to blow up these buildings. They wanted various, terrorist acts. They wanted all this stuff. It's always amazing though when you put cuffs on somebody and they break down crying too. Even though they're all warriors in something. I forget what it was. It wasn't Nation of Islam. It was some other strange thing. They had their spiritual head came down to Miami, and it was an interesting case. But that just tells you, even in that, people say it's Islam. It's not always. It can just be somebody that doesn't like the U.S., doesn't like what's going on, doesn't like different things. I mean, neo-Nazis are out there all over the place. The particular squad I was assigned to was the Al-Qaeda squad. That's what we did. It was leads to Al-Qaeda, anything Al-Qaeda related. And so that was just one that was one I knew I could talk about, because I remembered there was a press release, so I dug it up and found it yesterday. So is everybody done reading that? Everybody good? Okay. And then, yeah, that was they were very unhappy when that happened. So, as you can imagine. Sorry about the right side. I meant to cut that out. Maggots on the menu at the juvenile justice center. That was in 2006, so hopefully they've cleaned themselves up now. But yeah, that was a long time ago. But yeah. All right. So I had this supervisor one time, and I was going to grand jury. I was indicting all these people, and I was like, I got to go to grand jury. And my pager went off. And so sometimes they would replace you on trips. And so I went to him and I was like, sir, I got this case, I'm going to grand jury, and I'm going to indict all these people. And he said, William, make no mistake, protection's our bread and butter. And then they didn't replace me and I was gone. But the postal inspectors we were working with, that was my boss at the time, he hated the guy I was working with for whatever reason. He hated the guy, and sorry about that. I said, well, what do you want such and such to go sit in grand jury? And he's like, William, like I just said. So that's where the money comes from, and that's what you end up with. So this is me at the Great Wall of China. One of the trips I got sent on was to 41 Bush in Houston after he was a former president. And so at first I started off doing one thing, and then there was going to be an overseas trip, and they said, you're a young guy, we'll send you with them. And so I ended up going, and it was a fascinating trip. It was on a little private jet with him and her and the other detail folks, and just in proximity to everybody. One thing you have to remember, like with the service, is that they always tell you have to be careful. Like when you're with a dignitary, they're not your buddy. They're not your buddy. Even though your job is to do this, pal, they're not your buddy. And so you always have to kind of keep a decorum there and a kind of a boundaries. And so even on the plane there, I was, a few years on the job at that point, and I remember being like, oh my gosh. But even with them walking past you to go to the bathroom, talking to you, and that's one thing, these two guys, this was one of the detail letters here, Randy, and he said, they're very friendly. Don't let them suck you in though. You can't, they're not your buddies. And I said, no, I got you. So I ended up in an elevator with Barbara Bush, and she started talking to me a lot. And so I was kind of like, yes ma'am, no ma'am, yes ma'am, no ma'am, and she reported back to Randy that I was unfriendly, so. I didn't know. China was an interesting place to go. It's very nerve-wracking, I thought, when you're in that position. Like, I remember I turned the shower on in my bathroom, and there was a little square that didn't fog over, where they had a camera behind the glass. And we went to Shanghai, Tianjin, Beijing. And so we were in, I think it was Shanghai, but he was ready to leave. Mr. Bush was ready to leave at the time, so we were all gearing up to leave, and we're doing all that. And I say handler for lack of a better term, this Chinese lady was our handler, and she was like, it's not time. And we're like, well, he's ready to go, so we're going. It's not time. So she said something on her radio, and every driver in the cars got out and walked away. And so as a protection organization, you're like, oh my gosh. So we all just turned to kind of block the windows. We weren't sure what was happening. And that lasted for about 10 minutes. And then she's like, it's time now. And they all came and got back in, and we went on our way. Very controlled, very like nerve-wracking environment. That's the only place that I have actually had to physically put my hands on somebody in a protection situation. There was a businessman, and he just kept coming up the back, and I kept saying no. He slapped my arm. They know it's their house, right? And so they think they can do what they want. And so he slapped my hand. I was like, no. He slapped my hand, kept trying to get to Mr. and Mrs. Bush, and so I ended up throwing him over a table. And I remember when I did it, I was like, oh, I hope I don't go to Chinese prison. So, luckily, we got out of there, but it was a very interesting trip. We did a lot. The three of us raced to the Great Wall. I think it was 2 hours away from where we were, and we all wanted to see it so bad, so we just killed ourselves to get there, walk around it as much as we could, and then got back to get back on shift. There we go. That's just some badges and stuff I thought might be interesting. I went to Singapore with Bush 43 when he was in. Very interesting place. I liked Singapore. I thought it's very interesting because much you said about China, they're very regulated there as far as, you can go to jail for spitting on the sidewalk there, spitting your gum out or whatever. And there's cameras everywhere. I mean, everywhere. It's very clean and very regulated. But it was a nice place. It was an interesting place to go. So, but yeah, we had, this is from the Miami one is from a debate that was going on at the time. And then this is from the inauguration. And then you see that says RNC in is it New York, I think, and then DNC Boston. You just float. I mean, you go and you just fill in where they have you, and you might be. What's that old saying? Sometimes you get the bear, and sometimes the bear gets you. Sometimes you got an excellent job, and sometimes you're standing in a stairwell in Asia. That trip for like 14 hours with no relief, no nothing, no dinner, no lunch, no nothing. But it's the mission, and it's kind of the way you have to function in an organization like that. And then this is just a couple more. One thing the Secret Service does is every year you go to New York for the UN General Assembly, and you might get, there's no telling who you'll get. I mean, I've had the President of the Marshall Islands before. I've had the Prime Minister of Thailand. I've had small African countries. Any dignitary who comes who wants protection gets protection. They don't decline anyone protection. And so what you find a lot of times with these smaller countries is they don't decline it. They like the pomp and circumstance and whatever. I could probably say this because I don't think he's in office anymore, but there was a president of Nicaragua years ago, and he would fly into Miami. He'd want protection. Yep, I want it. He would have them drive him to Tampa. Is anybody familiar with that? South Florida, 6-7 hour drive because you got all the cars and all that business. And then he'd get to Tampa and say no thanks. And then he'd go do his own thing. And then when he was ready to go back to Miami, he'd say, okay, I want it again. And you have to by law, so they'd have to do it and drive him back and get him on the plane. So some of these folks, the Marshall Islands, for example, we were sleeping they had us in a Red Roof Inn in Oklahoma City, I think it was. And he went there because there was a battle of the bands in the Marshallese community. Apparently there's a big Tyson chicken plant in Oklahoma. And so I learned a lot on that trip. So a lot of Marshallese live in Oklahoma to process chicken there, and there was a battle of the bands, and it's so small there that he needs to make sure that he grips and grins and does all this. So we went over there, we're in a Red Roof Inn, and my greeting there was I had a terrible flight over. It was insane. Atlanta. Everybody who flies through Hartsfield and hates it. I got there, it was miserable. I think I was at Hartsville like 10 hours on a delay. Like I walk up to my plane and they said, "Sorry, it's gone." And I said, "But it's right there." "Yeah, it's gone." Shut the door and they were gone, and I was sitting there. So I get in there and I go to the Red Roof Inn, get in my bed, and I start getting eaten up with only the good Lord knows what. So I jump out, strip the bed, throw it out in the hall, go lay down on top of a mattress and go to sleep. So that night I'm post standing and one of the cops is like, "So what prompted you all to pick this hotel? What were y'all thinking about?" And I said, "I don't know, I didn't have anything to do with it." He goes, "We just busted a crack house in that room right there, and we just had a murder in that room." The Marshallese are so poor that a lot of their income is foreign aid we give them. And the guy he was very, very frugal. Very. When we got back to DC, he slept at the embassy. Like he was very, very frugal. So an interesting trip though. And then Sea Island, Georgia is the G8, the G8 and the G7s and all that, the world economic leaders. That was an interesting trip too, and they're post standing. On the one hand, you think, is post standing bad? You don't have a lot of thinking about. You don't have a lot of thinking to do when you're post standing. You just stand there and make sure nothing bad happens. The other stuff requires logistics and advance work and all these different things. So there's good and bad to all angles of it. One year when I went to, there it is, I was wondering where that was. So the last UN I went to, I had the Prime Minister of Thailand, and they were very good, very pleasant, very everything. So one night I came for duty, I was the lead advance, so I came up to the room, and I was sitting in the room, and all of a sudden he had a female entourage, and then you always had a police counterpart too, and so all of his female entourage came out just weeping, screaming. And so I'm thinking, what is going on? Like, there's no telling what you're going to encounter, right? He could have died. He could have died in the room. Something strange could have happened, whatever. So my police counterpart came up. He said, "Mr. Bolton, we have a coup in our country." And I said, "Oh, okay, a coup." So I went in there, flipped on CNN, and they said there were tanks around the Prime Minister's residence. He had gotten booted. And so I called, this is typical government, but I called the command post and said, "Hey, I've got an issue here. This guy's got a coup going on in his country. We don't have any intelligence on that." And I said, "Flip on CNN. It's right there." So anyway, I called the detail leader and I said, hey, not for nothing, man, but this is going on. He's like, "Crap." And I said, "What?" He goes, if he decides to stay in the U.S., we're stuck with him until he leaves." And I was like, "What?" He said, when Aristide back in, the 90s, got kicked out of office in Haiti, he was in the U.S. for 6 months and they were stuck with him the entire time. He's like, "What are they saying?" I said, "They're acting like they're going to leave now, but I don't know." Luckily for us, they immediately we took them to the airport, they got on a plane and left the country. But just the interesting things you run into, one thing, you just have to be patient with these kind of things. You just have to be kind of flexible as much as you can. I sub in the schools a lot now. After I was retired about 6 months, my beautiful wife said, "I'm not used to you being here, and you seem like you're bored, and you got a master's, why don't you go teach?" And I said, "Well, I don't really want to be a teacher. Let me go sub." So one kid said to me one day, he's like, you never get mad. Why don't you get mad at us? And I said, because y'all are not doing anything to make me mad, buddy. I said, it takes a lot to make me mad like that. I said, but I will tell you, you're going to do what I tell you to do, or you're going to go to the principal. That's it. There's nothing to get mad about. But my point in that was all this other stuff you just learn over time. You have to just be like, oh. Oh, yeah, that was a campaign 2004 certificate they put out. A lot of times you get a certificate saying thank you in the government when they know they beat you up, and right when they beat you down, you get they know a piece of paper is going to make you feel okay. So anybody recognize him? John Kerry. I can't remember his name. He's a wealthy, or if he's still around. He was a wealthy Democrat lawyer in West Palm. This was at this guy's house in West Palm Beach. Then there's that young fellow right there. And this was just, I was post standing that day for them, and you see that was Steve Caruso's a friend of mine, but he was in charge of West Palm. But I can't remember his name. He had been a governor in Florida, a Democrat governor. I can't remember what his name was. And then, everybody know him? Lieberman. Yep, Lieberman. And then all these, that's Kendrick Meek, different Democrat politicians were there basically for this fundraiser. This was during that time, but it was at this guy's house, and it was just, like I said, flexibility. Mr. Lieberman was there, and this little old Jewish lady, you see the rope line right there? She went under it and started walking toward him, and I was like, ma'am. And she's like, I'm going to Joe. And I was like, well, she called him Joe, so let me think this through here. So I just kind of walked with her, and then I saw him turn around and smile. I was like, okay. She was one of his donors, one of his big donors. So I think he might have been unhappy, because he was a senator at the time, but he might have been unhappy with me if I had stopped her. And there again, just random pictures. But that's kind of what you figure. West Palm Beach in the summertime in a suit. It's always a good time. Especially when you got a vest on, a bulletproof vest on, you got all your, you can't see it right there, but underneath that belt's a gun, a badge, a baton, radio, you name it. It's all underneath there. So in 2007, I think it was, or 8, I decided to switch over to customs. I kind of got tired of being gone, and then we also had, I was telling Brett, when I got hired, the moving was 3 to 5 years, 3 to 5 years, 3 to 5 years. And then it was okay. 5 to 7 years. Okay. 7 to 10 years. Well, so we have older kids, and one of our daughters just did not want to move from South Florida at the time. She was 13 or 12 or 13, and she just came to me and was talking to me about it, kind of upset and didn't want to move. And so I actually went to the bosses because I knew they liked me, and I said, hey, is there any way I could just go to DC now, even if it's a headquarters spot, if it's, back then, the service has changed a lot in kind of what they do. They try to be a little more flexible now, but back then you had your number, your turn in the hopper, and I wasn't at a turn to be transferred. And so I said, I'd like to just rip the Band-Aid off now, and we can make a move, and my boss said, it's not your turn. And I said, well, if not, I'm gonna have to go somewhere else. He's like, I understand that, but it's not your turn. So I happened to meet the agent in charge it was ICE back then. Now it's ICE, HSI, ICE, whatever, but it's customs. People I know that work there now who are a little older school still call it customs. But so I went over there, and I was in a money laundering group. Let me see if I got a slide for that, or if I'm just gonna talk about it. No, it's a raid. It's a buddy of mine, Rob, and myself on a raid somewhere. It feels like West Virginia, but I can't swear to it. You can see we're all laughing before the action starts. Oops, I went too far. So the group I was in customs was they call it a HIDTA, which is the High Intensity Drug Trafficking Area Task Force. They have them all over any major city. Chattanooga's probably got one, I'm sure they do, Knoxville. So the DEA is a partner, different state agencies are a partner, different local agencies are partners. And so the one I was in down in Miami was it was DEA. So we'd work like financial side of the house for DEA because they at that time they didn't have say the expertise. They got it later. They started hiring people who had more financial experience and whatnot. But at the time they needed us to do it. So we were in a building with them just on a task force. And so I was in a money laundering group with Customs, and I worked a case. If you Google the guy's name, you can find, I was trying to find the complaint I wrote, but I couldn't find it last night. But in 1997, the family's name was Rovelli. They bribed a lot of judges in Italy and stole 97 billion lira, I think it was, which is quite a lot of money by today's standards. So they took the money, they bribed these judges and got awarded different judgments because they paid them all off. So they got all this money and they immediately took it out of the country and put it in. This will sound criminal once I start talking about it. They talked to a Costa Rican lawyer about starting different companies in the Channel Islands, and then they funneled the money into those companies and then into our stock market at JP Morgan Chase and different places like that. And so when I got the case, I ended up, it was a lot of hours, but I ended up taking about $131 million from them and seizing it, and we ended up repatriating it to Italy. I don't know why we didn't keep a chunk of it. I don't know why we didn't do that. We just didn't. And then the Italians went after the Rovelli family individually and ended up grabbing them. The father, who kind of initiated the thing, had been long dead since then, but you had a son in Massachusetts who was a broker. So he ended up getting repatriated or getting extradited and different things like that. But it was an interesting case. It was very meticulous and very time consuming, very tracing the money. Okay, they did this, okay, all right, it went here, went here. And in search warrants and whatnot, I found more. The agency just said stop. So I found more money in the Pacific. So where I was looking was in the Atlantic side, Channel Islands, all that business, but I found documents pointing toward the Pacific too, and the agency just was like, we spent enough time on this, we're not taking any of it, we're not gonna keep any of it, so we spent enough time on it. So I moved on to something else. But DEA cases too, I mean, they might have an issue with a cartel or whatever, or random street dealer, and they want you to look at their bank records and try to figure out what they're doing and where the money's coming from, so they can seize. That's one big thing when you're indicted and prosecuted and all that federally, is like seizures. I mean, it's a big thing. Taking stuff, cars and money and houses and whatever from ill-gotten gains. That's like a big push. So, but yeah, I don't remember. I think that was West Virginia. I don't even remember what that case was on. It obviously wasn't mine. I think it was an en masse thing. We went and raided this place. So then in the Haida, so I was on the SRT, which is a SWAT team. And so I would work, we'd go do a raid 3 or 4 in the morning, then I'd come into the office after in my BDUs and whatnot. And so in our office, the internal affairs guys were there. So one night, because I would work like, what did I do, 12 to 8, 12 to 7, I forget. I would work later in the day just because it was a little more quiet and for tracing that godforsaken money in that Italian case. But so the agent in charge approached me and was kind of like, "Hey, what do you think?" He was a gun guy, and so he was like, "Oh," he started talking to me about guns. And then one day he's like, "What do you think about coming to IA?" And I'm like, "What is IA?" And so I did it. I bit the bullet and did it. My father was a retired police officer, and ever since I got on the job, I have always thought law enforcement's kind of a righteous profession, I think. And I think you need to be you need to be above board always. When you have a badge and a gun in your interactions and whatever, and everybody gets, you get accused of stuff all day long. Unfortunately, in this country, you could sue a ham sandwich in America. I mean, I got sued when I was a deputy one time. I was 12 miles away on a traffic stop when the event happened, and I still got sued because my name was on a report somewhere. And that lasted 2 years. till I finally got qualified immunity. But I kept saying, like, you've got me on radio, you've got me on logs, I was on a traffic stop. No, your name's on the report. So, but anyway, it's that easy. But I say that too. Even from law enforcement's a calling, or it should be. It's not about having a badge and having power. It's not about any of that. It's about, you genuinely want to, and this is probably just, when I was a deputy, the sheriff at the time was big on community policing. And he would say, I don't want you out on the roads, I don't want y'all stopping cars, I want you in the communities. That's what we're here for. We're here to make the neighborhoods safe, we're here to do that, we're here to make sure that people can sleep at night, we're here to do all that. You can go out on the roads, but I don't want you out on the roads all the time. So I kind of always took that. I think law enforcement is something where you should, in an area you work in, you should know most people in that area, especially, for example, somewhere like Athens, right? You should know, if you got a certain section of Athens, you should know most people in that area if that's where you normally are. But anyway, so I went into internal affairs, and it was an interesting time. I mean, we did cases you'd have anything from, let's see, we had a customs officer one time, and she was Hispanic, and then there was a flight attendant who was Hispanic who would fly back and forth internationally every day, and they somehow got into it, and it ended up blowing up somehow. And so the officer then basically coded the flight attendant where she had to be, who's traveled internationally, who's had to get the treatment on the way back in, where you were selected for secondary screening. So she coded her to where that happened every time. Well, this lady flew across the border at least once a day because she was a flight attendant to South America and back, just being vindictive. So you might have one like that, or I had a case one time. I went down to, a lot of these cases, you talk about traveling, but a lot of it's nice because you see places you don't normally see. But I went to the St. Thomas and the Virgin Islands multiple times on a case where there was an officer, and he had I'm trying to think how it says with my daughter in the room. He had a proclivity to where he liked other people in his relationship, and then he got hurt and was in the U.S. at a hospital, and his wife decided she liked the other person in the relationship more, which led him to beat the guy senseless, or not, he didn't do it, he hired somebody to do it. So things like that. But then you also have, down in the Caribbean, drug smuggling, you have, that kind of stuff. Border Patrol, for example, they have a very hard job. One thing about them is the Border Patrol is so large, they cannot pay to move everybody who's newly hired. So you might grow up in, wherever, Laredo, Texas, and go back there, and your grandmother and your cousins live in Nuevo Laredo across the border, and they happen to be cartel members. And then at a family event, they might say, hey, if you just don't be here, there'll be a bag for you with X amount of money in it. If you just don't be where you're supposed to be when you're supposed to be there, or if you could just ignore that area. So you have that kind of stuff. There's nothing eerier than standing on the border, and a concerned citizen will say, is pointing, that's where your guy goes all the time, he's the XYZ. So it's a necessary thing. Internal affairs or professional responsibility is a necessary thing. You do get silliness. You do get silliness when somebody got mad because of the way somebody looked at them, or whatever. In our society today, unfortunately, that's kind of the way that goes. But so we were down there for a while, and then I went up to DC. I did a couple of TDYs in headquarters, and then they kind of asked me if I wanted to stay or go or whatever. Am I running long? I'm almost done, I think. Anybody want me to quit now? Okay. A lot of times I teach at our men's group at church, and I always say that, like, am I running long? I'll stop now if you want me to stop. So, but anyway, so I went to headquarters, and then kind of got recruited to stay up there. So I went into headquarters, and then I had an opportunity come up to go into the IG's office. So every agency, DOD, justice, everybody has an inspector general. And the way the law is written is the IG is they are the overall IA basically. They look at waste, fraud, abuse, corruption, et cetera, et cetera. That's what their function is. So I had an opportunity to go over to special investigations at the DHS IG. That's the entire department at that. I mean, you got Customs is under that, Border Patrol, everybody and their mother. DHS is actually about 800,000 employees, something to that effect. And so I had an opportunity to go there, and that particular unit was the reason I went there. Excuse me, was it was interesting work-wise. So you might do counterintelligence work, you might do agency heads. I mean, I've interviewed different agency heads as I've in my career for various things. You might have a case on the. There have been cases on the deputy secretary of DHS, before, years ago. So you get complaints, and they come into what's called an intake center. I was in this unit for a couple of years, and then I went over into, they call it investigative services, but that's where you kind of put different program managers. So I was the national security person for that. I helped kind of get that going. And it was because of contacts I had made, again, how you treat people. I had friends that I worked with in Miami at the Bureau who ended up fairly high up in the infrastructure. And so I had contacts to kind of set stuff like that up. And so I did. But in that, I actually supervised the intake center. And we would get between 30 to 50,000 complaints a year. And I mean, it can be nothing. It can be a lot of nothing, but you have to sift through, and you have analysts who that's their job, is to sift through and see what needs to go where and who it goes to. And the thing about it is, the OIG's office, they have what's called first right of refusal. So anything that comes into an OIG that deals with an internal matter, any OIG has first right of refusal. That's the way Congress set them up. And so it was kind of like, do we want that? Do we want to let whatever? And unfortunately, with some agencies, and it's actually all agencies, you sometimes have good old boy networks where somebody gets in trouble and it happens to go back to their boss and nothing happens. When I was with Customs IA, we would have it all the time to where something would happen, and then the supervisor would be like, and it might be something administrative, something small. Well, I already took care of it. Well, once they've taken action, there's nothing else. You can't try somebody twice. You can't go after them more than once. And so that's the kind of things you run into. But so the SID was interesting. I traveled all over the place with that. It was a nice time. And then the ISU piece was nice too, kind of a nice break. I enjoyed ISU better. I said something about my train ride. I would listen to podcasts or sleep or watch a movie for 2 hours. But in SID, I had a car, which was a 3-hour commute. We lived in Fredericksburg, if anybody's familiar with Virginia. When we moved there, I told my wife, find wherever you want to be. And then she found us a nice house on a few acres down in the county in Spotsy. And that's where we were. But it was a nice little area. Throughout my career, I've been able to do good things. Like I went to the Marine Corps Command and Staff School when I was with Customs IA. I enjoyed it. It says distance learning there, but it was like half in and half out. The Marine Corps has in person, half in, half out, and they call it a box of books. I'm guessing that's all online now. But so it was a half in, half out. It was nice. We had officers from Ukraine, Slovakia, UAE, whatever. I was a Navy guy and then an Air Force cop, so I didn't, I had to catch up to operational art and tactics, and so that was kind of a good learning experience for me. But yeah, I've done a lot of good stuff, and it kind of culminated with, I've always been a proponent of learning, and so maybe I'll push this, there we go. I've been to Johns Hopkins leadership schools, and I've been to, that's FLETC's leadership schools, and I've supervised. This was probably the most tricky one, not tricky, I should say. How do you work with Congress, right, at the end of the day? This is how you do as an agency. How you theoretically are supposed to work with Congress at an agency. Yeah, so it's an interesting thing. But and then I had to get my master's in national security studies. I'd gotten an interest in Middle Eastern history and whatnot, just working on the JTTF, and so I pursued my degree in that, and I was telling my wife, I'm like, if we had stayed in DC and I did contracting work, it would have been probably relevant. Now I'm like, I'm a substitute teacher in Appalachia, so I don't. No, I joke. We enjoy. We're able to have our grandbabies over all the time. We have a couple that live with us, and we have another one on the way. My daughter just got married. They're going to move. They're going to move here. They live over in Gallatin now, and we have them stacking up. All right, there you go. I hope I didn't bore you too bad. And like I said, I had to pick and choose. I could have had a 80-page slide, whatever, but and I apologize. Like I said, there were some things I can't say, so I was kind of like, whenever I was thinking, it was because can I say that or not? Can I not say that? Because the minute I say it, I'd get in trouble, even though I didn't. So I appreciate y'all's time. I hope anybody got questions? Yes, ma'am. Talk to me.
When you say you can't say anything, for how long are you required to keep silent?
Oh, man, I'm trying to remember what that non-disclosure, how many years that was. They would have to declassify the documents, and that can be, yeah. Some stuff, I mean, I had a case one time where I literally got told, you're on a plane in an hour, I don't have any clothes, you better hurry. And I went home was with the service, Miami, blah, blah, blah. And I called her, she packed me a bag, and I said, I love you, where are you going? I can't tell you, I'll see you later. And she doesn't really know what I did, so I worked with people of which we can't speak of, doing things you can't speak of. So it's just what it is, so.
What do you do when the person you're guarding is doing something that's illegal?
I luckily never had that problem. It's tricky because, like I was talking about, it's very nuanced, right? I mean, I would say if it's something like, there's some things you have to intervene, right? Like if they're stabbing somebody or raping somebody. There are other things, I don't know. I mean, that's a tough question. I luckily, like I said, have never had that issue come up. The service is funny because you have to, especially on those on details that are more full-time, you have to have their trust, right? So, but you also have that,
Responsibility.
I would like to not say anything deep state or anything like that. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if you did see it and didn't say anything, depending on who it was. I don't know. What I have found working for the government is it's all subjective. So.
And then you have tags, left, right, and sideways. Do they deactivate after a certain event?
They're just ID tags. They're just ID tags. They're not. They don't have any data on them. They're just like, oh, this guy belongs here.
But how do you know?
Oh,
do you
when the
just
event's
throw
over.
them in a box when you're done with them because you're not going to need
They
them
don't.
anymore?
Yeah, I mean, you could shred them, you could throw them away. I mean, when the event's over, it's, it'd be dumb of me to like try to walk around with a Campaign 2004 something and try to get to a Secret Service event now. I mean, I would hope they'd pick that up pretty fast, but.
I'm a questioner, so I'll shut up now if anybody else has any other questions.
Go ahead, sir.
What did that big E stand for on some of those badges?
It was, men you have a gun, enforcement.
Okay.
Yeah, just so if somebody sees it, they don't, oh my God, I saw it. Yeah.
Okay, also, did you know Captain Ed Elgin of the White House Secret Service?
I don't, but I wasn't full-time in DC,
Right.
so I don't know if I've ever run across them. Because they've got their own thing they're doing, right? White House, the uniform division, sorry, White House police, they became the uniform division. They have their own thing they're doing, canines and securing and different. That's like the Secret Service has what they call a CAT team, and it's like a SWAT team.
I think he did the embassies.
What's that?
I think he did the embassies.
No, it was White House first, then you did embassies.
It might have been
Oh,
before
did
your
he?
time.
Yeah. What are you talking about? What time frame are you talking about?
I don't know when he stopped, probably about 95 would be a guess. But
I have a friend who started with the service in 1977, and he did 3 years. And then he retired, and work something else, so I can ask him, and he knows dead near everybody.
He was on the White House Secret Service under 4 presidents, I know
Okay.
that.
My buddy would probably know him. I'll have to ask him next time I talk to him. He snowbirds between South Florida and here, so he just reverse snowbirds. So he comes up here in the winter to his house in 10 Mile and stays down there.
He's
in the
not
summer.
alive now.
Right,
I
right.
just
What was it,
wanted-
Elgin? Is that what you said?
Ed Elgin.
Elgin. I'll ask my friend Al when I talk to him again.
He was a Christian, and he witnessed to everybody,
He would
everybody.
arrest him,
The-
witness him.
yeah.
He had his soul winning results printed in the Sword of the Lord,
Oh, no.
every issue.
Anybody else?
All right.
All righty.
Well,
Of course, I probably.
Well, if everybody wants to leave and you want to chat with me, I'm happy to talk to you.
Well, I probably am too old, they don't accept people
I'm-
my age.
if anybody does have any more questions, Will, if you would mind sticking around for a little bit.
No, I don't
And,
mind at all.
But I want to thank everybody for coming. Everyone give a round of applause.
Thank y'all for having me. I appreciate it.